So if you just think along those lines, anything is literally possible.
Welcome to Founder's Voyage. Our speaker today combines her entrepreneurial spirit with a passion for technology and empowering people with disabilities. In 2017, she formed Puffin Innovations, an assistive technology startup whose flagship product is an innovative mouth-operated input device which incorporates machine learning, artificial intelligence, and IoT to give quadriplegics like herself opportunities to lead more inclusive, independent lives. We are honored to have Adriana Mellozzi speaking with us.
Thank you so much, Spencer. And we're delighted that each of you could join us today. Adriana is actually going to kick off our discussion with a presentation about her journey, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussions. Adriana, thank you so much for being willing to share your journey with us.
Hi, I'm Adriana Mellozzi. I grew up 45 minutes away from New York City, 45 minutes north New York City. During the birthing process, I stopped breathing, and the lack of oxygen caused brain damage. And so I had cerebral palsy. I'm a quadriplegic. And that was diagnosed about when I was a year old. Because my parents noticed, and that's typically when people with CP are diagnosed, between 6 months to 12 months, because I wasn't doing the typical things of a developing child. So I wasn't rolling over, I wasn't crawling. And so, that's when they noticed something was wrong and figured it out. At a really young age, I learned that technology was going to be the way that I would be able to do anything and everything that I would ever want. So I embraced it so I was about 7 years old. This was back in the mid-'80s, early to mid-'80s. And my occupational therapist let me try this device that allowed me to use a computer. Back then, there was, those ugly monochrome monitors and big and clunky. I was able to type on a computer. And that was the first time I was ever able to do anything by myself. And it was just that feeling of being able to do something by myself without anyone else doing it for me really made such a great impact. And that's how I became a lover of technology and a techie geek. And then shortly after that, about a year or so later, I got my first power chair, my power wheelchair. And again, the independence I felt. I didn't need someone pushing me around. Of course, back in those days, the wheelchairs were, nowadays they make pediatric wheelchairs. Back then, it was one size fits all type of thing. So I had an adult wheelchair, and I was about 8 years old. And most of the wheelchair was filled with a seat, so it would hold tiny me in it. So it was kind of, comical to see little children in giant adult-sized wheelchairs because there wasn't the technology or the design yet. And so also At the time, we did not have the Americans with Disabilities Act. So for those of you overseas, that is basically civil rights act for people with disabilities. We just celebrated the 30th anniversary. So it passed in 1990 when I was about to go into 8th grade. So up until that point, so I was 12 or 13. I had just turned 13 when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. So up until that point, people had to fight, have equal access to, going to school and things like that. They did have IDEA, which is the Education Act, and 504, but it wasn't enforced as well until the ADA was passed. So my mom was constantly fighting for me to be in school. So in elementary school, I was finally in a regular classroom by 2nd grade. So prior to that, I was in a special ed classroom. I don't know, for those overseas, it's where children with disabilities are, and only children with disabilities. So even if you did not have cognitive disability, you were in that classroom. And so they would allow me to go into other classrooms, not full time, just random times. And one of the teachers said that she didn't want me in her classroom because I was a distraction. Now keep in mind, at that time, I was so shy that people didn't even know I could speak. So imagine me just quietly sitting in a corner, being considered a distraction. So that was kind of the environment of the times. By middle school, I was coding at that point, and then the ADA passed, which was amazing. So, there was actually a law that enforced what schools and public places needed to provide for people with disabilities. In high school, I was in all honors and advanced placement classes, and then I came to Boston for college. I literally arrived here on my 18th birthday and haven't left since. So I've started off as computer science major at Boston College, and soon realized that I was kind of tired of coding. So I knew I wanted to do something in computers, but I didn't want to just, be pigeonholed in that. And so at the time, the internet was exploding. That was fairly new. And so I did what most people do when they don't know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. I majored in communications. And so, I did some web design and things like that, but I also learned about advertising and marketing. Things like that. Graduated college, and, it was hard to get a job. As someone with a disability, people make judgments, right? Especially since I have a very visible disability. People are hesitant, or I would have a really great phone interview, and they'd be like, "Oh, come in and interview," and then they would see me and decide, "Oh, you most likely can't really do the job." There was one incident that I went for an interview. I had a really, really great phone interview, and they were like, "Oh my God, we're so excited!" Blah blah. Get there, and it's this really big corporate office, really swanky, really nice, and a huge lobby. I go to the receptionist, give her my name, and tell her why I was there, who I was meeting, and so I go and wait, in the waiting area. I'm watching, and I know exactly what's playing out. And so she picks up the phone, and then there's this door to the back where I guess all the offices and cubicles were. And I see someone peeking out of the door. And I knew immediately what was happening. So I'm sitting there waiting, and then the receptionist says to me, "Oh, the person that you were supposed to interview with is not in." Which, as we all know, was a person peeking out from behind the door. And I was really furious, and I don't remember exactly because it was so long ago. It was at least 20 years ago. But I know I was a mixture of mad, hurt, embarrassed because at the time I did not have an accessible vehicle and relied on paratransit. So Massachusetts has a system that they partner with our public transportation. They provide door-to-door service with accessible vehicles. Now, in order to use that service, you have to book it days in advance. You also have to give them a pickup drop-off time. So you have to estimate how long you're going to be somewhere. So, of course, I was now stuck there because I thought I would have an interview. And I budgeted about an hour so I wouldn't be rushing to get to the vehicle. So here I was, stuck in this place. I was absolutely horrible. I was maybe 21, 22 years old. So at the time, I didn't even know my rights, really. I should have filed a complaint. I should have made a huge stink. And I didn't. And I left. And yeah, that was one of the worst experiences ever. So winter of 2014, I received from three different people, same email that MIT was looking for people with disabilities to submit ideas for a hackathon. And it's funny because three different people sent me that email. So I was like, okay, this must be a sign. And this would be a dream come true for me, that I've always had all these ideas in my head growing up. People with disabilities are inherent innovators and problem solvers simply because we have to adapt the world around us. The world around us is not designed for people like us. So on a daily basis, we are constantly adapting on the fly just to do the most basic of tasks. So this was a dream come true. I went to the meetup they have a meetup prior to the day of the hack to form a team. This group of students came over and we just hit it off immediately. And we were working on supply list at that meetup. So typically what happens is all the people with disabilities whose ideas were chosen to participate, they sit at random tables, and then the students who are interested in participating in the hack will go around. It's kind of like a speed networking, speed dating sort of thing for the students. And the students go around asking questions of each of the people and to see what project they would want to work on. And then at the end, they sign up, by ranking what choice, projects they're interested in. That's how the teams will form. My team never left my table, and that was my team. And we had already developed a plan that night and came up with a list of supplies and all that great stuff. And that was my idea of the Puffin. And day of the hack, within 10 hours, we built a working prototype of my idea. And what my idea was, and still is, but has evolved, is a mouth-operated wireless input device. And so for me, I use my mouth, my head to control everything. So to control my phone, my computer, all of that stuff. So, I can only control those things if I'm at my desk where I have one of the most mainstream of devices in assistive tech, basically mounted to my desk. It's this big clunky thing, so that's where I have to be to access my computer typically, or I have to be in my powered chair so I can still access my phone, because my powered chair actually has infrared and Bluetooth built in, so I can control any infrared device. I just have to program the code in, and then it acts as well as a Bluetooth mouse. So I don't live in my powered chair, contrary to what most people believe. Believe it or not, people do ask wheelchair users if they sleep in their chairs. And we don't. We sleep in beds. And so, I wanted to create this device where I would still have access to my phone or tablet, no matter where I was. When I travel overseas, I don't bring my big, heavy power chair. My power chair is 500 pounds. And so I typically bring a manual chair. And when I'm in my manual chair, I can't do anything. Someone has to push me. I have no technology on that chair. So this was my motivation for creating this device. As well as I know so many people in the disability community who don't even own mobile devices simply because they physically can't use it. And so another part of, motivation for creating this was to allow those people to have greater access. And especially nowadays, if you have access to your mobile device, you literally have access to the world, right? You can connect to mobile banking, you can shop, you can control your environment. And so that's why I wanted this. So the day of the hack, we did it in 10 hours. We demonstrated it by taking a selfie with the judges. We think that's how we won. So we won first place. And then, because they were students, right? They were busy. They couldn't really dedicate a full time to working on this. And so, they kind of just sat for a while. And then a friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine, the same friend that said I should consult, was getting a master's at the MIT Sloan program. And she was doing her thesis on hackathons. And she said, she interviewed me and she said, so what are you doing now? I was like, I don't know. I really want to continue with this, but I don't know where to begin. I don't know what to do. So we partnered up and we began submitting grants and accelerator programs, incubators, all of that fun stuff. And 2017, spring of 2017, we got a grant from the VA, which is the Veterans Administration. We got a $200,000 grant. And literally a month later, we found out we got into Mass Challenge here in Boston, which is an accelerator program. So as a result of those two things falling into place, we were able to actually create what is now Puffin Innovations. And yeah, that's basically where I am now.
Thank you so much for going through all of that for us, Adriana. I personally am very interested in knowing a lot more about the Puffin. Obviously, I don't want to go too in-depth on the technical details for the moment, but although I have to admit, I'd love to have that discussion with you later as well. But for the moment, could you explain a bit more about what the Puffin does for you in daily life and the iterations you've gone through to get it to where it currently is?
Yes. So originally, and I can actually, let me see if I can share a picture of how it was. The original hack, it was all wireless, right? So I would move the joystick in any direction, which would then move the mouse pointer on the screen. So a mouse pointer would pop up on my mobile device as well as any other device. And then when I would want to click on something, I would blow in it. And then if I wanted to right click, I would sip on it. This piece down here was to hold, to mount my phone on it. And that was just an extra thing. So that's how it looked originally. So you can see, and then this is how it looks now. So, which is obviously a lot better. So everything is in here in the housing. We no longer have a pressure sensor. Not using air pressure anymore. We're using light and a physical button. So there's photo transistors in this part, and how it works is the person will cover this part with their lip or their tongue or whatever, and that would create a click. And we also have a mobile app that goes along with it, so the person can control how sensitive, the speed, and also what each button does. So you can program this to either be the left or the right click, and then down here you can lightly bite on it, which is a physical button, and again you can program it to be a left or right click. So this is what it looks like now. We also are integrating AI and machine learning, so the user or the device can learn from the user. What I mean by that is people with disabilities, their body is never the same day by day and even hour by hour. And so what may be easy in the morning can become a little more difficult. And so we want our device to recognize when someone is struggling and adjust the settings accordingly. So yeah, that's the basic overview.
How do you click? Is it by biting or blowing?
There is a physical button at the tip that I bite, or use the photo transistor that detects a change in light where I can cover. So one is the right click and one is the left click. That is the user's preference. So in our app that accompanies our device, the user can set all their preferences of what button does what type of click.
Joel's question was, how does the constant updates by smartphones' operating systems affect the performance or behavior of your system? If I might just add on to that, I also wanted to learn a little bit more about technically how people can sort of interface with the Puffin for, like, if I were to make like a Steam gaming controller or something.
Yeah, so it's just a Bluetooth, basically acts as a Bluetooth mouse. And so now actually the updates have been great because iOS, with their recent update now allows Bluetooth mouse connectivity. So our device actually now works with all platforms, which is really great. So before it was just Android, Windows, Mac, and each of those platforms work differently in general. So when I use a Mac, I need to really crank up the sensitivity and speed of the mouse simply because it does not move as easily as, let's say, a Windows. The same with Android, iOS. So that's another thing in our app is that it has different profiles. So you can have your Windows profile, you can have your Mac OS profile, you can have your Android profile, or iOS profile, you can have your good day profile and your bad day profile. So yeah, actually the updates have been a blessing for us because it makes our device integrate even more better, actually, and with more devices now. Does that answer your question?
That absolutely answers my question. So any sort of interface that would work with a Bluetooth mouse would work with your system.
Yes, exactly.
I was actually going to just ask a follow-up question, Adriana. Did you design it with a certain operating system in mind first, or was that difficult to kind of branch out? Because it sounds like you have pretty good integration at this point.
Yeah, no, it was mainly focused for Android, because, the whole intention was to use with mobile devices. And at the time, the only, other than Windows, that allows Bluetooth mouse to connect to it, the only option was Android at the time. So that was our main focus, was Android devices. And also, most people with disabilities, or with very intense physical disabilities, use Android devices. And so, one of the main reasons is that it was a lot cheaper, or they were a lot cheaper. Now they're pretty comparable in price, but you can still get a decent Android phone, not as much as an iPhone, right? And also, there are all these great apps for allow Android phones to used with their computer, and now Windows has actually integrated that. Prior to that, I would use different hacks to control my phone with my computer. TeamViewer is a great app that allows people to use their phones on their computer. So I could, use my mouse that's on my computer or whatever device I'm using as a mouse on my computer and have complete control of my phone as well. And so, that's why we really were focused on Android, because that's what most people had if they had mobile device. And then again, there are people that didn't even own a mobile device because they couldn't physically use one. Again, Android would be cheapest and most affordable. So, yeah, Android and Windows were pretty much the focus.
Thank you very much for going through that with us. What I did want to get a little bit of understanding from is how the pandemic shutdowns have affected Puffin, have impacted Puffin.
Yeah. So we basically March we went down. So my engineer is also he has a disability. He has cerebral palsy as well. That's the thing with CP is that everyone's different. So he's completely ambulatory, and sometimes people yell at him for parking in the handicap spot because they don't think he has a disability. So there are varying degrees. But we are both high risk, right? So we haven't seen each other since Inez was here visiting, right? When before everything shut down, we got to meet Inez. I think that was the last time we've seen each other. Actually, around that time when Inez was here. Yeah, it was around that time. Yeah, that was basically the last. But on a positive note, prior to COVID, I had been in contact with a professor at university here, about 45 minutes west of Boston, in Worcester Polytech. And they have great engineers, and he said, why don't we have a group of students use your product as their final project? So right now we have a team of students working for free to complete the design for distribution. And we're really lucky, actually, that we're for the next, school year. I have about 10 students working, super genius students, working on this to complete it, and it's all free. So, yay! So yes.
And then, just reading Inez's question aloud. You said that the body changes within the day. How does the Puffin adjust to it?
Yeah, so what the machine learning and AI is going to do is it'll learn the usage patterns of the person interacting with it. And by that, I mean, we don't want to see what they're doing, right? So we're not going to be spying on people. We don't care if they're on Facebook or Snapchat or whatever they're doing. What we're going to be monitoring is the actual physical interaction with the device. So how they're, if they're pushing in one direction a lot slower or less pressure or more pressure. Sometimes you put more pressure because you're kind of just stalled there, right? So we want it to recognize those things and then adjust the settings accordingly so it doesn't respond when you don't want it to respond, you know? So if you're accidentally over hitting it or doing things like that, you know, I know that maybe pushing in one direction, if your body gets tired, you're not putting as much energy or you don't have the energy to put as much force in that direction. Also, position, right? And most people have this problem. If you're sitting at your desk during the day, right, when you get in, sitting up straight, and then as the day goes on, you're start slouching. Well, for people with disabilities, that happens, but at least you can fix yourself. You can sit yourself up. You can reposition yourself. Those people with disabilities cannot reposition themselves. And so the dynamic there from being in a different position really affects how you're able to use the device. Eventually, we do want to create a mounting system that kind of has computer vision. So if you do slouch, or as you slouch throughout the day, the position of the device can follow you, so it's always in a good position, right? So that's kind of how we see it.
Thank you so much for the question, Ines. And Adriana, thank you so much for answering it. I think, as Ines said, that's one of those things that people might not think about, but actually has a really big impact to the system you're working on. And so a lot of people might not realize it, but if they're working with people with disability, have to actually accommodate for it. Now, Raman, you asked a question, which I'm just going to read out, Adriana. Have you thought of applying your technology to stroke patients?
Of course, yes. So our initial target /audience is spinal cord injuries because our competitor, the device that I actually have been using for over 15 years, is the first device that they get and they become injured. And this device does not connect to any mobile device. It doesn't, it's big, it's clunky, like I said. And so our initial target is spinal cord injury. But of course, traumatic brain injury would include stroke as well. Spinal cord injuries are usually, annually, there are about 12,000 spinal cord injuries in the U.S. alone. And they have increased throughout the years simply because of distracted driving. And typical age range is between 16 and 30. And so at that age, you're already, especially nowadays, you're very connected to your phone. Your support network, right, is your social media or being able to text family, friends. And so when you have a spinal cord injury, you kind of lose that quote unquote sense of normalcy, right? All of a sudden you're completely dependent on people for everything. So that is why our initial focus was that, because if they have access to their support system, studies show that when your mental health is in check, right, you heal faster. And so how can you have good spirit and good mental health if you can't connect with people that matter the most to you?
I feel like it makes a lot of sense that like you saw yourself in the persona first, but I feel like I know we're going to get to it, but I know this technology has application far outside, what you kind of set out to accomplish, and I'm really excited to hear about that. And Nez had a follow-up question. What is your business model for the future? Do you want to sell Puffin to the insurance companies or rather online mouth to mouth?
I like the mouth to mouth thing. Yeah, so we have multiple revenue streams. So it would be a B2B, because a lot of people with disabilities don't have a lot of disposable income. A lot of people are on Social Security, and typically people go through nonprofits to get their technology. So we have a B2B model, which we've already connected with a bunch of organizations that serve people with disabilities that already have commitments to buy multiples of Puffin, which is really exciting because they also let people try out the devices before they buy. So before either a government entity purchases it or whatever, they loan out these devices. That's how I, and most of my devices in my lifetime is I try things out, and then whatever works for me is the one that we end up going with. So we have that model. We have a B2C, which will be really, really small. Like I said, people with disabilities typically don't have that much of a disposable income. But I connected with someone in California, an organization that they could manage the financing, so like payment plans for people. Also, our product would be 30% less than the products out there that are similar to ours. So that's another factor. We always said in order for something to be accessible, price is also part of that. When you think about accessibility, people need to be able to obtain it. This is a tool for them to lead more independent lives. So, if they can't get the tool, then it defeats the whole purpose. So that's another model. And then another thing, that once we have people using this for maybe a year or two, we really think that the data that the machine learning will be using, such as how people are moving and using our device, would be beneficial to medical professionals and people developing technology. And so that would be our other revenue stream, which would be a SaaS model, especially for spinal cord injury units, where they can then track the progress of the patient based on how they interact with our device. So those are kind of our revenue streams.
Thank you so much for going through that all with us. Now, I might just follow up with a question also sort of about the future of Puffin, but more in a vision sense. I was hoping sort of, where do you see Puffin in the sort of general landscape of the devices that you're working on, that are in that sort of area that you're working on, and sort of where you see Puffin as a whole?
So this is the first of many. I mean, I have so many ideas in my head. And so once this gets off the ground, we want to be a platform for assistive technology. So even partnering with people that have other great ideas. We want to be that leader of creating technology that's meant for the future. So we see our device, we're thinking ahead. We want our device to have IoT connectivity. We're hoping that smart cities will be built in the next, maybe 10 years or so, hopefully less, but we see our device integrating, being ready for that. So I could go up to a building and use my device to, activate the automatic door, use my device to activate the elevator, and choose what floor, things like that. So that's what we see as the future for Puffin. I hope that answered your question.
That's super exciting. I would love to. I don't know if you even have a timeline for that yet, but I'd love to hear more about that. Actually, kind of wanted to. You won't be surprised by this question, but I wanted to switch gears a little bit. A couple weeks back, we, had a talk about patenting law, and you educated me about working with a patenting agency. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you came to that decision and what you saw as the pros and cons, versus going through a law firm.
Yeah, the biggest pro was the price, really. We couldn't afford an attorney if we wanted to actually get it done. And so that was a pro, but we were introduced to that patent agent through someone else that was connected, or that I was connected with, and he had done multiple patents with this person. And so he connected us. And this guy is he was amazing. At the time, so let me backtrack. So 2015, we had the hackathon. We won first place. We got so much press at the time. We had all these newspapers reaching out to us. We even had the New York Times. We were in the New York Times. It was insane. And so we were getting all these interviews. We were like, okay, we could share all this. Like, we were so excited. We're like, well, it's in writing that we shared it, right? So how can anyone take it or steal the idea? Because, hey, it's right there. I said this and I said that. And, my other teammates said this and that. And about a year or so, over a year later, someone else that I knew was like, oh, you really should start the provisional patent for it. So I was, kind of on the market, talking to random people who were in the industry of patent law. And this one person spoke to him, and he goes, well, it's been over a year. Everything that you put out there, it's been over a year. It's called prior art. And you have no claim to it anymore. I was like, wait a minute, what? Like, it's obvious that we said these things. It's obvious we did these things. There's dates. Because all these publications had dates on them. And he's like, no, that's how it works. Once it's over a year, you have no claim to it anymore. And so that's when we became very tight-lipped. That people never understood what we were doing because we were so afraid to give too much information out. And so then we met the guy that I told you about who introduced us to the patent agent. And at that time, we had already filed the provisional patent with a local law firm who was really because we did most of the legwork, and my business partner really did a lot of the legwork. We didn't have to pay as much. He was giving us a really good deal. But at the same time, if we moved forward with the real pet, it was going to cost tens of thousands of dollars of legal work or whatever it is they do. I don't even know. So we contacted Stephen Powers, and we had a call with him, and we explained what our device did, and he understood it. He was the first person that we had a conversation with that understood exactly what we were talking about, exactly what we were doing in our first conversation. And that's when we knew, we're like, oh my God, this is the guy. And then he also added to our pet. So he gave us more ideas, like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. So yeah, that's how we ended up. And then let me back up again. So right before we started the provisional patent process, and right when we started in 2017, the spring, summer 2017, a Mass Challenge, and after we got the VA grant, we noticed this website that was doing what we had or were working on, and had used exactly same language, like down word for word, of what I had said in multiple interviews years prior to that. So that was another motivation for us not to talk to anyone in great detail about any of it. So yeah, so just keep in mind, don't give just enough, but not the secret sauce. And we were giving it all out prior to that. And then again, after that, we weren't giving enough out that people understood, but we were just too afraid. So I honestly, I can't tell you how to manage that, a fine line of giving too much info and too little info. But he was great.
Thank you so much for going through all of that, Adriana. I think personally, as someone who's also working with some relatively newish technology, not quite as innovative as yours, patents are one thing that I've considered to be kind of a mystery that I need to figure out and am slightly terrified of. So I'm glad to hear about your path through that sea and weeds. Now, something that I did want to ask you about is how you define or measure success for yourself personally and professionally. This is one of those questions we like to ask sort of regularly to get an idea of people's mindset in a sense.
Right. So obviously we don't have any revenue yet. So it's definitely not money. But as with any entrepreneurial journey, right, there are ups and downs, and always those times where, like, why am I doing this? Maybe I should stop for a while. Maybe I should do something else. And then someone comes along, kind of reaffirms your original, or reaffirms the reason why you originally started this journey. And so along the way, it seems that people, or I would hear from people, or things would just happen right at the right time when we would be kind of at our low. You're like, oh my goodness, can't continue. And I guess what I measure as success is people who say, oh my goodness, I really need this. When can I have it? And how it would affect their lives in a good way. So that's kind of how I measure the success of the company. As for career-wise, I think it's people in the industry that I've respected a really long time now see me as an equal and come to me with questions or, advice on certain things. And so that's where I see success with my career, is that I'm doing something right, I guess. If people in the AT, which stands for Assistive Tech, in the AT industry are actually listening and paying attention to me, these are people that who I have looked up to and refer to for advice and things like that. So I think that's how I measure success.
That's like a very poetic answer. I really appreciate that. Well, because I feel like it's, through especially the current set of challenges you are experiencing with the shutdowns. I think, having that deep inner drive is just so key. So I really appreciate you explaining yours. I did want to ask you one more question. Kind of, we've been using it as a closing question. Do you have any, words of wisdom or, mantra you live by, or you can steal some that else has given you? Any words of advice that you'd like to leave us with?
If you guys have seen the video that Nancy shared, I think the end kind of sums it up. If you're really passionate about something and you really believe in what you're doing and what you're working on, then just keep going, and nothing is not impossible. So that was a video, won an award last year from the Not Impossible Labs. And one of their taglines is, what once was possible is now possible. And that's basically true. I mean, think about it. Everything that exists today was once impossible. Now is possible. So if you just think along those lines, anything is literally possible.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I really want to thank you for all of your time today, Adriana. It was really wonderful speaking with you and hearing about Puffin. And I can't wait to hear about things more. And Nez, thank you so much for inviting Adriana to this community. So to everyone listening, we do actually have some members of our community like Adriana that are friends of campers. So Adriana does have an MIT affiliation, but she didn't do the boot camp program in the same way that we did. But I'm so glad that you're part of this community, and I'm so glad to have met you. So I say that kind of letting everyone know that you can nominate other people to join this community that you think would benefit from it and bring value.
Thank you. I mean, this is I've really benefited from listening to other people speak and just learning different things that I had no clue about. So I think that's great that so many people here have so many different backgrounds. So it's just great to learn about all these different things that you otherwise would never have the opportunity to engage in those discussions.
Yeah, I always get benefit from listening to others, even if it's technically a little bit over my head.
And I hope everyone has a great day and evening ahead.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
This has been Nancy and Spencer on Founders Voyage Weekly Podcast. Our speaker each week can be reached through our Discord server. Our intro and outro music is from the song Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band. We'll be back again next week for another episode. Until then, have a great day and continue your voyage.